back to my channel, where today I'll be going over freehand crochet. I thought this would be a nice video to make because there comes a point in your crochet journey where you kind of want to challenge yourself a little bit more. You've tried the beginner projects, you've tried, your granny square era, you've kind of done a lot of what you do to set the groundwork for improving upon your skills, and you want to kind of go crazy a little bit. And the beauty of freehand crochet is that you can make virtually anything, so a lot of your threshold of what you could make and the degree of difficulty on it was capped, and this effectively enables you to kind of like go beyond that. I'm going to first start off by explaining what exactly freehand crochet is, because I feel like there is a sort of dichotomy between what's synonymous with freehand crochet and still technically a part of it versus what the general definition is, I would say, within the crochet community. Next up, I'm going to explain maybe why you do need it or why you'd want to do freehand crochet, as well as maybe reasons where you might want to stay away from it. I'm then going to go over foundational things or tenets of freehand crochet. We're going to go over some steps overall for the process, and then I'm going to go over examples so that you can see sort of the flow of how you'd apply the said steps, and then I'll end with the conclusion. Now, what is freehand crochet? According to Google, freehand crochet is also known as free-form crochet and is a method of crocheting where you create a design without following a specific pattern. So this is what I mean by there is a dichotomy. It is synonymous with free-form crochet, which is essentially like when you're making something like this, where you're just like starting to crochet and just going with wherever it takes you. However, the definition that I feel like is more what you maybe think of, or when someone says it, they're leaning towards, is this one. A crochet technique that relies not on a specific pattern outlining steps, but more of a choose your own adventure way of working in order to make something, specifically something crochet. And so basically what I would say that it is instead of having a pattern or a guide, you're going and you're making whatever the item is from scratch or from inside of your head. Why exactly do you need it? So I've listed benefits as well as pitfalls, just so that you have a little bit more working knowledge of what exactly we're getting into, and that you can make the right decision. Because maybe you might like learn more about this and then decide, oh, I really want to try this, and I wasn't like, I didn't know about this, or I didn't know much about it. Or maybe you're gonna learn about it and be like, I'm good on that. So that's what this is for. So first up, for benefits. It reinforces your working knowledge of the overall craft of crochet. Because you're doing more and more projects, and specifically you're working on these projects and gaining both problem-solving skills as well as constantly like doing like the different stitches. Maybe you're working decreases, increases, and other techniques that are more advanced. Because you're constantly doing them, you're reinforcing your knowledge of them. Another benefit is that there's no need to search for or purchase a pattern, which is great because then you sort of feel less, I feel like, you feel less pushed in a box. I feel like sometimes with crochet specifically, you're sometimes searching for things, and there's a lot of things that you can find, especially as pertaining to patterns, but there's also sometimes that you kind of come up short or you have to settle. And for here, I don't think you need to settle because you can literally make virtually anything. Another benefit is that it makes any project customizable, so no restrictions or restraints. And this in particular benefit that I thought about was more so geared towards when you're making garments, because there's often like a sizing sort of that exists among patterns, and it can be finicky because it's not necessarily always the same. But with that, even though they try to take into account gauge, it's not perfect, and then it sucks sometimes because you have to go in between sizes, and so you have to either size down or size up, and then based on that you'll get sort of like a different fit than you were anticipating. Whereas with this one, you're making it to you or whoever you're making it for's specifications, thus making any projects that you create freehand wise customizable. And then finally, it can offer stress relief. Just in the same way that when you crochet, maybe you find that it's like a nice little relaxing hobby. With freehand crochet, it's essentially the same thing. Pitfalls. it does require quite a bit of trial and error. I say, especially in the beginning, more so frequent. Like, I feel like no matter if it's your first freehand crochet project or like your 20th freehand crochet project, there's still quite a bit of trial and error that exists. But I feel like as you get more proficient with it, it's, you know, these trial and error processes are quicker. So you're like, that's not working. Let's change it. Let's pivot. Oh, this isn't working. I'm going to do this instead. And so it feels less tedious, or it doesn't register as much. Another pitfall, since you don't have a pattern, you are going to be having to do more problem solving. With patterns in general, while you can feel like I talked about sort of like capped at, you know, what you can make, a lot of the problem solving is done for you. So you're essentially just pulling up, you know, the pattern, and it's telling you what you need to do, special instructions, so that you can understand how to get from point A to point Z. And that's because the designer, like, they went through the trouble of saying, okay, here's what we're going to make. Here are the different, like, problems I've ran into. Here's how I fix them. And then they refined it into a pattern. Whereas here, you're not getting that luxury, so you're going to be having to be the person doing the problem solving. Another thing is that it's not necessarily beginner friendly, which is why I noted at the beginning that this is more of sort of a door avenue into more advanced techniques and skills. I definitely feel like this is one of them. It's not to say you have to be like super advanced to do freehand crochet. It's just more so to say that this isn't something that I would recommend someone to just pick up a crochet hook and yarn and just go for immediately, because it can be tedious and it does require a certain level of foundational skills built up. Finally, there's a lot of emphasis on the planning stage. So if you're someone who you don't like planning and you don't necessarily like having like sit down and think, okay, we're gonna do this, this, and this, it might not be for you. Again, though, this is more of something that is applicable to the way that I work on freehand crochet things. Like, I know that there's probably several people out there who the way that they work is that they just kind of like dive into it. But if you are going to work it the way that I'm going to be going over it, it's a little bit more emphasis on that planning stage. Next, we're going to go over tenets. So I have 6 primary ones, but this is essentially just if I had to print a big poster and I'd be like, put this up and this is all you need to freehand crochet, these are going to be about the 6 things that I'd want to include on the poster. First up is that planning beats skills when skills don't have a plan. So for a project, I would break it into maybe like 3 to 4 primary things. You need tools, you need a plan or a pattern, and then you need your overall skills. Tools, those are just things that you buy and that you need as a medium to make the thing. Skills are, you know, what's going to enable you to take the raw actual tools and materials into whatever you're trying to make. And then you have your plan or pattern. If you have a pattern, obviously, that takes a lot of the guesswork out of how to do things. But your plan is going to be really where it shines, especially if you don't have a pattern, because it's going to set you up for really making sure that in the phase of creation or execution that, you know, you're on it. You know, like, okay, I need to do this next. Here's how many of this that I need to make. Second up, visuals and visualization are key. So with this one, it's essentially just saying that I wouldn't recommend going into this without any type of reference. So a lot of the times for me, and I know other people, this will be from like whether it's an online site that you like shopping at a lot, or maybe you saw this person, like your favorite creator or something, wearing some certain something. It also doesn't necessarily have to be in the medium of crochet. Obviously that helps, because then you know, like, okay, I can actually replicate that, and it'll look the way, if I do it, properly on my end, it'll look the way that looks. But just some sort of reference for something. If it's something that you thought of out of your head, you know, like that, then, you know, maybe you might want to sketch it out. But in general, go into it with some sort of visual, because it's going to help a lot. Number 3, when in doubt, go back to the basics. I feel like it's natural instinct sort of to like just freak out when we come across something that we're unfamiliar with, or we're like, I don't know what to do. Just breathe and then think about what you know versus what you're trying to achieve. So like, let's say you have like a piece or like sleeves that you're working on, and you know that they sort of like flare out and they do it in a certain way. In your head, you might be like, I don't know how to, like, how many of increases I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know this, I don't know that. Instead, just focus on, okay, I know I do need to be increasing. It might take a little trial and error in order to get it exactly the way it is, to figure out like exactly how many increases to create that sort of ruffle effect or look, but you're going to get there, and that's okay. 4 is that math may save you a lot of frogging. It's funny because it kind of, it pivots or segues pretty nicely, but I talked about how it can give you a lot of trial and error, having to figure out like, okay, how many of these to do, different things like that for increases and decreases. But if you, especially in the planning phase, sort of think about, okay, I want, let's say you know that the beginning portion of the sleeve is going to be measuring this dimension versus increasing by like 3 inches, and you know that you want it to be a certain length, thinking about like based on your tension, like how many stitches make this like an inch, or how many rows make an inch, and then doing the math in that way can really help you and save you a lot of time from having to frog and be like, oh, that's a dud. You're still probably going to have to frog, but at least you have like, you're frogging maybe like 3 times as opposed to 7 to 9 times. Think about it like that. Next up is be intentional. There is in general going to be a lot of stops, but if you're very intentional, particularly in the phase of creating a flow to say, I'm going to work on this first, then this, instead of just jumping right in there and like thinking as you go, then you'll find that it'll be a little bit more tolerable. And then finally, write everything down. I can't tell you how many times I've worked on a freehand crochet piece and I either like really like it and I'm like, oh, I really want to recreate this, and it takes me so much longer because I didn't write it down. Or maybe I made something and I'm like, this is terrible. But having like the baseline for figuring out why exactly it was terrible would have helped me further in, you know, making it to what I like. So just write everything down, particularly also if you maybe plan on eventually releasing it out into the world, because then someone else will be able to like follow your line of reasoning. It doesn't have to be perfect or look good. Like if you saw my little sketchbook where I write them down, it does not look good, but just write it down. Finally, we're going to get to steps. Now, I would break the steps that we have, I think there's 7, down into 3 kind of phases. You have your preparation steps. This is where you're going to actually set your goal and decide how to achieve that goal. Then you have your execution. So this is where you're using that creative problem solving we kind of mentioned, along with your prior skills and knowledge to actually create the thing. Don't worry, because especially based on how I'm going to break it down, a lot of the thinking about, okay, I'm going to have to do this, I'm going to have to do that, that's going to go on in your actual prep step. So then by your execution step, you should feel fairly confident because you've kind of worked out the possible kinks. There are probably going to be things that come up. There usually is. But it's going to be so much less stress than having to do all of that problem solving or all of that working of things during the execution. Finally, you have the refining step. This is where you're going to be really honest with yourself to figure out, okay, is this the end product that I wanted? If it's not, how exactly can it be improved? Overall, you're going to fix what you don't like and then keep what you do. Now for the steps. So step 1, choose what you want to make. As I stated before in the tenets, preferably with some sort of reference or picture. So it can be something as realistic as like a picture from a catalog from the thing that you like. Or maybe it is a sketch that you drew out of something that you think was going to look really cool. Some sort of visualization. That's going to help us a lot with the next step. So this is going to be where we break it down. You're going to be asking yourselves a lot of questions here to just figure out like how exactly the thing was made. Either maybe you know how it was made because it's something that maybe you thought of, and so you already kind of have an idea of, okay, you do this and this. Or maybe it's something that you saw that looks really nice, that you have the reference for, and you're not as well versed on how it's made. You're going to ask yourself things like, what basic shapes and parts make up the design? Is it like a bunch of squares, or could be made by a bunch of squares? Is it a panel or 2 panels? Things like that. How, if at all, the project is combined. And when I say combined, I just mean like seam. So like, is it a special technique so that the seam is virtually invisible? Is it a more intentionally visible seam? Things like that. You don't have to get super fancy here, but depending on what exactly your end goal is, you might have to be really specific. And then, like, are there any increases or decreases? There likely is going to be, and there's going to be different points. Like, I don't think there's many things that I've created where it's been like, oh, there's just one major increase or anything. Like, a lot of things that exist inherently have them. So just thinking about that and, like, how you would incorporate it. Step 3 is going to be drafting a basic workflow. This can get as detailed or as not detailed as you want it to get. But the more that you break it down or in the previous step, that's going to obviously add more steps, but it's also going to give you more clarity on how to do these things. So it's essentially just saying, okay, I'm going to work on this first. Then I'm going to do this. Then I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to do this. And then at the end, your end goal is the overall tangible product. Next up is going to be gathering materials. This is kind of self-explanatory, so I don't think I need to explain it much, but just the bits and bobbins that you need. So it's going to be more obvious things like what we've covered before, like yarn and hooks. But obviously, like maybe you have buttons or beads and things like that maybe in this project you need to get as well. Then you're going to actually make your project. As I said before, this should be the least stressful portion of it because you already have kind of worked out, initial kinks. You have all your materials. You're just sitting down and making it. And that's where that stress relief part comes from. But again, it takes time. Step 6 is you're going to actually have a tangible product. This is where you're going to be doing your critiquing. So you're going to noting any changes that you would make. Obviously, if it's, the way that you want, it fits and has, the drape and everything that you want, cool, awesome, great. If it doesn't though, note why. So is it too tight in certain areas? Is it the length that you want it to be? Is the color off? Is it, what exactly do you not like about it? Because that's going to help you pinpoint what exactly you need to change so that when you come back and you make those necessary changes, you do like it. Also note that for certain things that maybe you don't like the drape, for instance, it can be fixed via blocking. So before you get into this step, make sure that you've blocked your piece if that's where you're going for. I always recommend it, but again, it's, dealer's choice. Step 7. This is just going to be where you repeat 5 and 6. And so this is especially where you can get pretty iterative. By this point, though, the iterations, you will go through 2 to 3. This is not necessarily the same as when you have to frog because you messed up in the workflow. This is the point where you're just figuring out, okay, is it massively terrible or massively not what I was intending, or are we good? But you're just going to repeat the execution and critique steps until you get what you're looking for. So now examples. This is where we're going to put everything into practice. Just so that you see okay, it's not as scary of a process as I think it is. So here's our first one. This is a granny squared skirt. And when in the outline step or the prep steps, you're essentially just going to be noting. This is the break it down area where you're just noting based on the picture and what you do know, how is it pieced together and created. So I started with the waistband in this case. Now, usually for most waistbands, they are ribbed, and it looks like they kind of tried to go for this effect here. But if you notice, they attach the yarn onto this seamed squares. And because of how they're working like that in the round, you can't really get the same ribbing effect, at least not easily. And so what they likely did here, because I've seen it before, is a front post half double crochet and or a back post half double crochet, just to kind of mimic the ribbing. Although obviously it's not complete one-to-one mimicry. The next thing is that if you overall look at the skirt, it kind of puckers in at the waistband, which is a sign that there's likely not the same amount of stitches in the overall squares together as is the actual waistband. So there's probably going to be some decreasing that needed to happen. I also noticed that the body is created by a bunch of squares. They look like classic granny square 3-cluster patterns. And based on, just observing, it looks like there's 3 rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4 for each square, which is easy to see. One, because the clusters are pretty distinct, but also because they use different colors for each row. Another thing is that as opposed to it just being a skirt where it's seamed on both sides, everything seamed together, there is an opening of it, which is what creates that slit or wrapped effect. You'll also notice that there's buttons right here that have been sewn on one side of the skirt, and likely so that the actual skirt like closes. Though there are like little chain loops that are created in order to just attach around the buttons. Finally, although it's a little bit more of a tinier detail, you'll notice that there's a trim that's still granny clustered, so it does look like the squares, and it like seams like around areas right here. That's probably added after the fact though. So now for the workflow. So here's what I would propose. I'd work on the squares first because it encompasses most of the skirt. Then I would seam them together except for that opening. I'd then actually add the waistband on the top, which is going to also help because it's kind of attached here to this section as well that actually stays open, but just on the top. Then I'd add that trimming before adding the button and the loops. Also note that this is what I would do. That's not to say that this is like the only correct answer. Like for instance, you might decide that maybe you want to add the trim before you do the waistband. It's your project, not mine, but this is just what I would do. So now on to possible critiques. Maybe the skirt's too tight. If that's the case, it's probably that you don't have enough squares and you might need to add some. You might have that the waistband's too wide, to which case you probably didn't decrease enough, which is why it's a bigger. But instead of having to like frog the whole thing or like redo that part, you could try to add an elastic. That way it's tighter. Like sometimes like that'll happen to me. I feel like adding one anyway, even if you do have the proper amount of decreases, I would recommend. Maybe the button loops are too big and so they come off of the button, or they just like look, they stand out. You might need a smaller chain loop. Now to our second example. So there is this star top pattern. And so I've noticed that it's a star. So obviously I don't necessarily know how to make one, but I don't know if you can see it right here behind the square. You have this sort of like chart that actually shows you how to make the star pattern. The only thing that would probably need adjusting is it only has up to a certain amount of rows. So maybe you need to make less or more rows, but you need enough that it covers up both your chest in the front as well as some of the side. Another thing is that I noticed that the top has like this halter tie, and from the looks of it, it's just made via a chain loop. Maybe they go back in also and do like a single crochet, but at its essence, at its basic essence, it's just a chain. Then there's also like these back ties that are likely created via just making a really long chain and then weaving it through like corset style, or it's just like attached to here and used it to tie. But that's overall what I noticed from the pictures. Based on that, our workflow is going to go as follows. You can create the star before adding the top tie and then creating that overall back and bottom piece. Of course, the top tie and the back bottom piece can be interchanged in the workflow, but I would probably recommend the actual star first, just because you can make the tie before, but like you don't necessarily know how much stretch it's going to give once it's attached to the star, so you need the star. Possible critiques. Maybe the star is too small or too big, to which case you might want to add or subtract rows. The back piece could not be tight enough, which would mean that you'd either need to tighten it, like actually physically, or you'd need to make the star smaller. That way, then it naturally is going to be tighter. Finally, we have example number 3. This one, I tried to put them like in maybe not necessarily like a specific order of difficulty, but I definitely would say that of doing the examples, this one was probably the most difficult. Because at first I only had this photo, and then upon like doing like my actual overall observation, I was like, I kind of need more details. And so then I found the other photo. It looks like the overall body of this sweatshirt is 2 heart shapes for the actual main panels. Then for the overall sleeves, rounds of double crochet or half double crochet. Obviously it's alternating in color, so you'd need to like every couple rows switch off the color. The cuffs, as you can see from here, are ribbed, so you just do the ribbing and then attach it to the overall sleeves. The hood, that was the hardest part of this because I was unsure about that, and it's not like it's super obvious, so I had to look up other hoods and then based on the different methods that exist, figure that out. see. So it's like you don't necessarily always start with all the information. Sometimes you gotta go out and like think about how to make it. But I think that this hood is made by separately creating a panel of double crochet or half double crochet, and then with 2 panels created, you would seam the middle of it, and then the bottom of those 2 would then create like the part that's attached to the top of the back panel. Based on that, the workflow would be to create the 2 heart panels first. Then I would likely attach my yarn directly to the little armholes after I seam them, after I seam the panels, and actually do both of the sleeves before creating the cuffs and adding them. Then I would make the hood and attach it to the back panel. Possible critiques. Maybe the body's too tight. If that's the case, you might need to make the hearts bigger. Obviously, if your body's too loose or too big, then you might need to make it smaller. Maybe the sleeves don't fit well, which this could be a function of either you made the armholes not big enough, or maybe like the sleeves are just like baggy or too long, to which case you might need to add, less rows, or if it's the opposite problem, more rows, just to adjust the fit. Maybe the hood doesn't fit right. In general, based on how I think the hood is crafted, the foundation chain would equal like the overall height of the hood, and the number of rows would be the width on each side. So you'd adjust those parameters based on what exactly is not working. Overall, freehand crochet is a method that enables you to make nearly any project without a pattern. And while this can help build your comfortability with crochet techniques and skills, I do understand that it can be time consuming and might take a while to pick up, because you have to like gain that sort of natural instinct to sort of look at something and be like, okay, this, and just note different things. In general, keeping calm and using what you know are the primary requirements for freehand crocheting. I know I said you need to do this and this and this, and I do, stand by that. But in general, at its essence, it's about maintaining your patience and then just being able to pull out what you need at any given time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please leave a like if you did enjoy it.